One of the most common questions that I get asked in my work as a clinical psychologist is this normal? Well, when it comes to anxiety, some things are totally normative, like the emotion that we all get from time to time. But sometimes it could be something else completely. So let's take a look at the role of anxiety in our everyday lives, including when it might be a good idea to seek out a helping hand or even the assessment of a professional. Anxiety is a complex and multifaceted emotional state characterized by feelings of worry, nervousness, fear about current or future situations, or just general uncertainties. Anxiety is a natural response to stress and can be considered a normal part of life. In fact, it's pretty adaptive. When humans get anxious, your body is perceiving a threat, and your body prepares to handle that threat in a variety of ways. Your sympathetic nervous system is activated, which is your body's fight or flight response. This response leads to the release of stress hormones like adrenaline and norepinephrine from the adrenal glands. Your heart rate can quicken, leading to an increase in blood pressure, which prepares your body to respond quickly to perceived threats. Some people start breathing more quickly than what's usual for them. This helps oxygenate the blood, which supplies more oxygen to the muscles. As your body's making all of these preparations for potential physical action and getting all worked up, you might even start to feel some muscle tension, sometimes felt in the neck, shoulders, or back, leading to stiffness or discomfort. There are a few other ways that people experience anxiety. Some people find that when they're anxious, they start to sweat, and that's your body's way of regulating body temperature, helping to cool things down in periods of anxiety or stress. When some people get anxious, they have increased sensory sensitivity. That means that you have a heightened awareness of sight, sounds, and smells around you. Sometimes your pupils might even dilate, increasing visual acuity. All of these things help you become more aware of your surroundings and improve your ability to pick up potential threats. Finally, anxiety can affect your digestive system, and this is personally how I experience anxiety. Because your body is reducing the blood flow to your digestive organs, it can lead to symptoms such as stomach upset, nausea, diarrhea, or constipation. I like to say that when people are anxious, they're preparing to fight, flight, or freeze, and they do so by peeing, pooping, or puking. Any and all of these types of responses are a totally normative experience to a perceived threat. But what is a perceived threat? Well, that depends on the time, place, and person. Let's take one of my anxiety-provoking situations as an example. Running a 5K. I live in a whole house of runners, so I'll be able to use my son and my husband as examples of how anxiety might manifest itself differently or might be perceived differently depending on who you are. A teen runner on my son's cross-country team might be anxious about their performance compared to their peers, or might be worried about competing in front of others. The threat here is that they may be socially rejected based on their performance, or might even be seen as a weaker member of their team, which is another form of social rejection. Feelings of being socially rejected or the potential for expulsion from a team is a form of an external social threat. This is pretty common in teenagers, but it's also common in people that have a sensitivity to social rejection. Now let's take the same situation and see how it could be threatening to another person. Say, me. For me, I consider myself a fairly physically fit person, pretty much on par with my son and my husband. So going on a family 5K race presents an internal threat for me with potential feelings of shame for not keeping up with them or threats to my own self-image, since I have to face a reality that's inconsistent with my own self-perception. For me and for most people, that would be anxiety producing. Now let's take my husband. My husband and other military service members face a financial threat when it comes to running certain races. The Army requires completion of a 2-mile run within a specified period of time as a condition of continued service. His job, and therefore his livelihood, literally depends on his performance in this race. So you can see how these feelings of anxiety could be normative and totally understandable given the specific time, place, and context. Even though I discussed the same situation for myself, my son, and my husband, the feelings of anxiety that are going to be elicited are likely going to be really different depending on the individual. My son is an avid runner. My husband is also an avid runner. I hate to run. I'm not very good at it. And I consider myself a high achiever. So when there are situations where I know I won't be performing my very best or at the top of the heap, it's challenging to my ego and causes some anxiety. My husband has experienced many years in the military, and he consistently performs very well in these types of races. While my son has been on the cross-country team for the past 2 or 3 years, he is likely not to have anxiety when we're doing a casual family 5K, but may still experience a normative level of anxiety before a race. And this brings us to our next point, which is anxiety isn't just something to be tolerated, it is actually something that can help us perform our very best. In anxiety, this is known as the Yertz-Dodson curve, and it looks like this. You can see that on the x-axis there is anxiety, and on the y-axis there is performance. So if you are really worked up, you are probably not going to perform at your best. But if you have no anxiety at all, you're performing about as well as that person that is overwhelmed by anxiety. Too much anxiety may mean that you may be too worked up to be effective. Too little anxiety might mean that you just don't care about the task and you're just not here for it. Test taking is a classic example of the relationship between anxiety and performance. When you just don't care about a test, you could barely muster the attention needed to read through the questions. When you think the test is life or death, you can barely stop crying long enough to circle the right answer. Your best performance requires just the right amount of anxiety. Just enough to give a damn, not enough to hyperventilate. So all of these experiences would be classified as typical responses. But when anxiety becomes excessive, persistent, and overwhelming, it might be helpful to check in with a mental health provider. Only a healthcare professional working directly with you could diagnose you with a mental health disorder. But here are some signs and symptoms that an evaluation might be helpful. Anxiety itself is simply an emotion and not a mental health diagnosis. When people talk about excessive anxiety, they're often referring to a diagnosis of generalized anxiety disorder. This is a diagnostic classification found in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, also known as the DSM. But there are several types of anxiety disorders outside of generalized anxiety. This includes things like panic disorder, agoraphobia, specific phobias, or social anxiety disorder. Today I'll be focusing on generalized anxiety disorder, but if you'd like a video on any of the other anxiety disorders, give this video a thumbs up and I'll know that there's interest in learning more about the other anxiety disorders. People with generalized anxiety disorder tend to have excessive anxiety and worry about a wide variety of things. So it's not just falling behind in your local 5K race, it's also about your performance at work, how you're doing as a parent, whether or not you're being a good enough friend. Now, we might all feel like this from time to time, especially when things are particularly stressful. But individuals with generalized anxiety disorder feel this way more days than not for long periods of time, so greater than 6 months or so. Some people experience prolonged periods of stress, but they're able to adequately manage and control that stress, even if it happens over a long period of time. Individuals with generalized anxiety disorder might find it difficult or impossible to control or appropriately manage those feelings of worry or anxiety. With this anxiety disorder, anxiety could be experienced in all of the normative ways that we discussed earlier in the video. But a diagnosis of generalized anxiety disorder requires at least 3 or more of the following symptoms. You might feel restless, keyed up, or on edge for extended periods of time. People with GAD might feel fatigue, might experience difficulty concentrating, or might feel like their mind is going blank. They might experience irritability or might have that muscle tension that we discussed earlier in the video from being keyed up all the time. People with generalized anxiety disorder might also have sleep disturbances. This can be difficulty falling asleep, staying asleep, early morning waking, or disrupted sleep. Finally, if the feelings of worry or anxiety are causing some sort of functional impairment at home, school, or work, this might be another indicator that it's time to reach out to a professional. There are many theories as to why people have difficulty managing anxiety. Some theories focus on over-inclusion on perceptions of threat, while others focus on those physiological symptoms and the ability to get those turned on more easily for some people compared to others. Either way, anxiety is a normative part of the human experience, and we all feel anxiety or worry from time to time. With appropriate assessment, treatment, and support, individuals that have difficulty managing feelings of anxiety can learn to manage their symptoms and improve their overall sense of well-being. Qualified mental health professionals are particularly important for assessing assessing and diagnosing for a mental health disorder, especially because a diagnosis of generalized anxiety disorder or any anxiety disorder requires a thorough assessment to understand whether or not the symptoms are due to another mental health disorder. This is especially true for anxiety, which can look a lot like depression in some people. If you're interested in learning more about how depression is the same or different than anxiety, check out this video right here.